Morning, everyone. How you doing? So my presentation this morning is on user-centered design. Um, it's, First off, let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Jason Luttrell. I'm a technical lead, or there's my email address if anybody wants it. And I've been doing web development since 1999. And today I'm going to there was already some discussion about usability processes, best practices, so I don't want to overlap too much, but I'll give you an overview in case you missed those presentations. But my focus today how many people are developers? Project managers? Customers? Any other categories that I missed? What categories?
Administration.
What?
Contract administration.
Oh, okay, all right. Yeah, so we have a good mixture of people. So I'm going to assume that, as you know, this is a beginner. So if you're an expert in usability research, this might be a little basic. But again, my approach, I'm coming from the project management side. How many people have how many people have ever been on a project and you were told that there's not enough time or budget? Raise your hand. Time or budget for usability. So this is real world. That's what I'm talking about. Like yesterday, there's good presentations on user research and usability studies, but the problem is that in real life, there just isn't time or budget sometimes to go through the ideal processes. So what I'm going to talk about really quickly is just what user-centered design is. A product based on the needs of the users, obviously. That may seem obvious, but a lot of times, what people don't realize is that the customers or the technical aspects are what people focus on the most, and users aren't really given a whole lot of consideration in the design process. So we want to change that approach, because the users at the end of the day are what matter, because if a product doesn't cater to the users, it will be a failure. Or it might be a failure. Some projects are still successful. So users participate in the development of the requirements. We have we have the customer requirements, but we also have the user requirements that feed into that. So we want to have users participate as much as possible in the definition of the requirements and the design and every step of the process. And it's also an iterative process of predicting user behavior and then testing those assumptions with actual users at each stage. So we start out and then we do user testing on that, confirm our assumptions, and then we do the actual further evaluation to see if that is a usable product, and then we deploy it and we do field testing, start the process all over. So it's iterative. Here's a little illustration. You can start with a pencil sketch, build up from there to a clickable prototype to design top. This is what we say, low fidelity to high fidelity. Yeah, does somebody have a question? Yeah.
I don't want to jump in on your presentation. Would you mind recommending one or two products for clickable prototype?
Yeah, that's actually what the presentation's about.
Okay.
So-
Go ahead.
no, I'm going to get to that now, definitely. Actually, yeah, good question, because one of the things is a lot of people aren't aware of all the tools out there. So that's, if, I'm a geek, so I get geeked out by tools, that's one of the things I like about going to conferences, is finding out, like, what are all the tools out there. So exactly what I'm going to talk about. But what are some of the challenges? As I started off by saying, we have cost. I was speaking to somebody yesterday who wouldn't even do something unless it was $10,000 a usability study or project. So if you're working on a project where that's just not feasible, that's going to be a factor. Time. We have to get this website out. We don't have time for usability research. We may not have people. If you want to do focus groups, you have to be able to get people together. You have to coordinate all that. So that all that takes time. And usability labs are expensive. Like we have to have eye tracking software. We have to have the cameras, the equipment. And you may not want this guy to do your user research or participate in your usability testing. So you got to find people who are representative of your audience. The ideal is to get a cross representation of your users. So maybe for this class, I'd have a PM, a designer, a contract administrator. Another constraint, and this is of course about government here, is the Paperwork Reduction Act. So if you're doing a website for the government, you obviously have to adhere to federal requirements. Some of those being that if you have a standardized collection of, like a survey, anything that asks questions in a standardized format, whether that's an online questionnaire, what have you. If you're doing that for 10 or more people, you have to get OMB clearance. OMB is the Office of Management Budget. So, or PRA, you have to get that cleared through the government before you can do any surveys like that. And also, this is something else to keep in mind. If you have something embedded on your website, like a pop-up, that can be presumed. So an easy way around that is to invite the participants instead of just publishing something. So a lot of the tools out there, which I'm not going to talk about today, a lot of the tools out there are about embedding like a questionnaire or screener on your website. And that might not be possible unless you have the time to get OMB clearance. So this does not apply if you're just asking for general feedback. So if you just have a comment section on your website, that's fine. Because that doesn't need clearance. It's just asking for general feedback. But as you may know, the approval process can take a long time, like 6 to 9 months. There are other considerations of privacy. If you have any PII that you're collecting, there's some strict rules regarding that. PII is personally identifiable information, such as your email or address. You can't, if you collect that, there's certain processes that you have to go through. And if you're using an application or third-party website, you have to have a privacy impact assessment, PIA. So a lot of these tools, you don't want to be setting up an account like on Facebook or Twitter unless you've already got clearance, because you're setting up an agency property. And also that applies to third-party codes that you may embed on your website, like Google Analytics. You may have to have a federally compliant terms of service. I know with HHS, for example, they have on their website listed all the federally compliant terms of services that they have. So you may have to check into that first before you can just go off and start using a tool. And also some cookie, there's some limits on cookies, although that's loosened up the last couple of years. It used to be you couldn't even use Google Analytics, but now that's changed, unfortunately. Okay, so going to the question about what tools are available, let's talk about what kinds of tools are out there. Some of the tools are geared towards systematic evaluation. Systematic evaluation includes things like heuristic checklists, checking the page speed of your website, checking to see if it's accessible, like 508 compliant. All those things affect usability, but there are things you kind of do yourself, if that makes sense. So Jacob Nielsen is the foremost usability guru for the internet. Created Nielsen's 10 usability heuristics. This is kind of like a checklist. It's not an app or tool, but it's a tool you can use as you're assessing the website, looking to see if it's usable. So there's some things like does the user have the freedom to choose and make mistakes, make their own mistakes. Tool is Google Analytics. This does a lot of things actually. You can do heat maps. You can find out people are getting error message pages. You can find out how long a page loads. So there's a lot of stuff usability-wise that you can glean from Google Analytics data. I'm assuming most everybody's familiar with that and is already probably using it on the website. Google has a page speed insights, page speed, which gives you insights about and also there's that I particularly like. It's called SortSite. This will actually crawl your entire site. There's not a whole lot of cheap tools out there. There's Accenture, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. But this one's actually pretty cost effective, and it will crawl an entire site. And it not just only it doesn't just give you usability, it gives you broken links, errors, 508 issues. So what we really want to get into is user research. There's a lot of tools out there that allow you to actually research, get information from the users. This is, well, for example, you can use surveys. You can create surveys. You can also do card sorting to develop your information architecture. You can do clickable prototypes like you were asking about. So there's a lot of tools that you can use. The most cost-effective way of doing that is to use software online for remote testing. The reason for that is because you can increase the number of participants you have, and the diversity of like people at anywhere. You don't have to worry about scheduling them because they can do it at their own time. You don't have to moderate that. You don't have to moderate that. And there's typically no equipment needed. So it's actually, highly to use online tools if you don't have a big budget for bringing in a guru or having a lab. You can use Nielsen, as I was referring to earlier, advocates for lean user experience and says 5 participants is enough. In fact, for the best return on investment. So you don't actually have to go out and get 100 participants. The focus should be on qualitative data and not quantitative data, because statistics can sometimes be misleading. The only downside to remote testing is that it is more quantitative focused, so you want to keep that in mind. SurveyMonkey is a pretty popular tool for creating surveys. I've used this recently, in fact, to survey users of a website and get feedback. I got some pretty good insight on how people view the website. So this is free, I believe. So that's one of the most popular tools for that. And you can see like example questions. For example, is it easy to navigate the website? You can ask any questions. And also, one thing I would recommend is to make sure you have open-ended questions not just, you don't want just quantitative data. You want to try to get as much feedback. Card sorting, let me tell you about that. So a lot of people don't know what that is. It's called card sorting because we use, well, you can use index cards or post-it notes. As you can see in this picture, these days, most people do it on setup. And you can do it in a conference room on a table or something. So that, it's pretty easy. No special tools required except for paper, cards, and markers. That's it. One particular tool that I like to use is called Optimal Sort, and this is an online version of that. On the left-hand side, you can see they don't have to be pages. Lots of then to the allow them to create their own categories. So in this particular illustration, create a category called news. And what you want to do is you want to try to see what are all the different categorizations that people come up with, what are the nomenclatures that they use those categories and names that the users come up with. Because, and this way to, like if you have a client that's really insistent on, the information architecture being a particular way, this is a really good way to steer them to a, it's always easy to say, it's hard to convince a client that they're wrong, but it's easier to say, like, look at the data. The data shows the users this way. So if you have data, this definitely can help. Users to generate their own categories. Assign those cards into the categories. You usually start with open sorting, and then once you've generated an initial information architecture, then you can use this closed card sorting exercise to confirm your assumptions. So you have to massage the data, to come up with this, but you can confirm the validity of your information architecture using closed card sorting. Another exercise you can use, before I get into that, this just shows you some screenshots for Optimal Sort. You have an introduction screen. It helps if you capture email addresses so you can kind of go back to the people who are. Put your own custom instructions, like how to use the site. And also, this is what you call a dendrogram. What this is, it shows you on the left-hand side all the cards, and the branches show you the relationships that mathematically that are using their branch here might be one category, right? Or this branch. And then you can use that to come up with categories based on that. Anybody have any questions? I know this can kind of look confusing sometimes.
Yeah, just very basic. So the card, so to speak, and the method of deciding how best to arrange the pages onto.
Right. This is a mathematically determined way based on all the user feedback. You have to look at it and interpret, some categorization here, but it gives you some, a method to which to base that on. Does that make sense? And this here basically shows how people assorted the cards into categories. The darker the number, the more agreement, the lighter, the less agreement. So if you see a lot of gray, light gray, then that means it's not really clearly defined in the user's minds. Okay, so another tool, as I was going to get to, is if you want to confirm your information architecture, this is what we call reverse card sorting. So you take the information architecture that you generated, and then you ask the users to perform tasks, and all they're doing is they're just clicking on the tree. And if they get to the right node in that tree, then it's a success, and if not, it's a failure. So all you're doing is testing the information card sorting. And here's a little chart, shows how many people succeeded and how many failed. Another tool, and these are actually all from the Optimal workshop. So that's a really good tool. If you get a subscription there, you can actually use all three of these tools. This one here is called Chalkmark, and it's basically a heat map of where the users click. So it takes the same task that you created, and you can see where the users are clicking on a wireframe or design. So you can see, if the users are if the design is effective. This is another tool called Solidify, and this is for building out clickable prototypes. A lot of people, and I do this too, is a lot of people build out a prototype using HTML or whatever, just really rudimentary, and then they do their moderated testing on that, and that's fine. This allows you to do remote testing. It's not, the downside is it uses images instead of HTML and actual web page, so it's not going to be as responsive, although you can kind of work around that. The good thing is that you can do remote testing, so you can email this to users, and it'll actually show you the task, and they can click through, and you can get the data without ever having to do any moderation. So this is actually a nice and easy way of doing that, and it's also very inexpensive compared to options. Yeah, there's other tools I think you can use, like Moria, whatever. There's, a lot of the tools out there are thousands of dollars. This is very cheap. So here's an example. It gives you a task. The user clicks on that after they read it, and then they see a mock-up of the web page. This, if it's in a mobile device if you're on a mobile device, you won't actually see the mobile device image, but you can see it on mobile or desktop view, and you would click on the design, and if it's like a hotspot, it would link to another image. So that way you can kind of build out a prototype, a clickable prototype, without ever actually having to do any coding. And you can do slides and transitions, so you can kind of emulate some of the interactivity. And there's another tool called Open Hallway, which also does where you create the user test, but instead of just getting the data back, you can actually see recordings of the videos. And this is what they call the think aloud method, where the users talk about what they're doing while they're doing it, so you can hear. And that's actually more qualitative research, which is good, because instead of just getting a statistic on how many people were successful, you find out like the user might have hated that. So you wouldn't have gotten that from a quantitative method. So this is actually a pretty good method too, and also very reasonably priced as well. So, a lot of these tools are actually free up to a certain number of users, or free for a 30-day period, which is for a lot of people all you need. If you need something more sophisticated than that, I'm sure there's options, which we're not going to cover today, but those are some of the lesser expensive options. So in summary, any user research is better than none. So if you can slip it into your project somehow, that's better than just like saying, oh, we don't have the budget for usability testing. You can always, you can send out a survey. Those are all things that the setup for the test do take some time, but it doesn't take a lot of time from your end, because you don't have to moderate them. You can just maybe how you would use them, yeah. Yeah, there's other tools. Again, Google Analytics is free, but like Web Trends. the issue, especially with government websites, is that you have to make sure if you're putting it on the website that you have the terms of service that's federally compliant. So that's why, I don't really utilize a lot of other tools. Does that make sense? Any other questions?
Could you talk more about how you value heat maps?
Yeah. Like, so you're asking like, what do you get from it, or what's the
How reliable are they?
how reliable?
What's the buy-in for your stakeholders?
So the thing about heat maps is that it just shows clicking. It doesn't really show you, like there's two types of heat maps. Sorry, there's eye tracking heat maps as well, where if you have eye tracking software, actually look up where the users are looking. A lot of these online to a big button in the middle of the page instead of seeing something attended, that would be a red flag right there. But it, has to be, there are limits. So you have
I get a great search onto categories.
So your question is if the users are, well, yeah, when you're generating information architecture, you want to use terms that people that a lot of times when you're dealing with customers, especially in the government, they have their own lingo that's really specific to their operating environment that they understand, but nobody in the outside world understands. So when you look at search results, it's organic because these are the data from the public. These are the terms that people are thinking. Whereas, the terms that you might come with your customer requirements might be different. So that's one way to glean, the naming conventions and whatnot from that. It also shows you what is most important to the users, so you can prioritize based on that data. Yeah, those are the things that come to my mind. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. But how do you very
Yeah, yeah. At the end of the day, the customer is always right, of course. But the thing is about data, especially
when is the best time in the project life cycle to use these capabilities? Obviously, you have to have your site created and enough content to sort of. And then the other question is about how frequently you do this. You don't want to just be thinking of your information.
yeah. Well, you want to do it early and often. That's the management. I mean, not the earlier in the design process, the easier it is to make changes. And when I say often, I mean not like every day. I mean you want to do it throughout the life cycle. So after you get the project, you want to maybe send out a survey or something to get user thoughts. Then you create a prototype. Then you do some testing on that. Then after you develop the website, then you might do some field testing then. So every step of the waterfall, there is a way to get user feedback. But the earlier, the better. Because if you develop something, so that's a valid concern. Like if you the issue is when you want to test it, right? That's the thing. Like, if you want to moderate your testing, or if you want to build, use Solidify, for example, where you just link them together, you can just upload an image. So it doesn't matter what you created, you can still use fireworks. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Nice to meet you. Good.
Yeah. Nice to meet you. Yeah, I'm at